Imagine stepping into the CEO role of a massive, multinational organization.
Okay.
But you only got the job because your predecessor was literally kidnapped by a hostile government.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
And now the very people you're supposed to be leading have locked you inside a building, like physically barricading the doors.
Yeah, that's intense.
And they're refusing to let you leave until you promise to commit treason against that exact same hostile government.
I mean, it is the ultimate pressure cooker. You are basically trapped between an empire that has already proven it will, completely destroy you,
Yeah.
and a local crowd that demands you stand your ground, no matter what the cost is.
Exactly. And that is the incredibly tense, entirely true story of a 7th century pope. So welcome to today's deep dive. Today is Sunday, May 31st, 2026, and we're unpacking this intersection of history you probably never realized existed.
Right, we're looking at the meticulous sort of behind-the-scenes craft of medieval monastic librarians.
Which sounds dry, but it's not.
No, not at all. Because their daily grind directly fueled these high-stakes political standoffs, like the one we just described with Pope Eugene I.
Yeah, so our mission today is to really show you how history is not just a passive list of facts gathering dust somewhere. It is a curated, active performance. It's an ongoing narrative shaped by the people who kept the records, the people who sang the chants, and, the crowds who literally locked the doors of a church to force a destiny.
And to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to completely discard our modern understanding of how history works.
Right.
Today, we generally view history as a straight linear timeline, right? You have the past behind you, the present right now, and the future ahead. It's very clean, categorized, static.
Yeah.
But in the medieval Christian mindset, time did not move in a straight line. It moved in a spiral.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because that spiral concept is literally the key to everything.
It really is.
In a spiral, time is anchored by sacred events, specifically biblical milestones and the martyrdoms of the saints. So the way a medieval person experienced time wasn't by just watching the days cross off on a calendar.
No, not at all.
They experienced it through the liturgy, through the Mass, the daily prayers, the very specific melodies of chant.
Right. When they celebrated a feast day, they weren't passively remembering something from centuries ago. The ritual commemoration actively pulled that past event right into the present.
Which is just wild to think about.
It is. Think about the immense power of that belief. The liturgy rendered the sacred past tangible again. And the person who managed that spiral of time for a community was known as the cantor.
Or sometimes the Armarius, right?
Exactly. If you look at customary texts from places like the Abbey of St. Victor in Paris, the cantor was far more than just a lead singer in a choir. They were the master of time and memory.
Wow.
They managed the scriptorium, they oversaw book production and repair, they assigned the daily readings, and crucially, they were responsible for the computus.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the computus because calling it just like complex math doesn't do it justice.
No, it really doesn't.
The cantor had to calculate the exact date of Easter every single year, and that requires reconciling the lunar calendar with the solar calendar, which is an absolute mathematical nightmare.
It is an incredibly delicate astronomical balancing act because the lunar year is roughly 11 days shorter than the solar year.
Right.
If you just let a lunar calendar run without correction, a holiday like Easter would continuously drift backwards through the season.
You'd eventually be celebrating a spring resurrection in the dead of winter.
Exactly. So the cantor had to use sophisticated algorithms, specifically these 19-year cycles, to force the lunar and solar phases back into alignment.
Because if they mess up,
If the cantor gets the computus wrong, the entire community observes Easter on the wrong day. They fall out of sync with the cosmos, out of sync with the universal church, and that sacred spiral of time just shatters.
so the cantor is less like a modern database administrator and more like a visionary movie director.
That's a great way to put it.
They aren't just filing away old footage. They have the power to pull the audience directly through the screen, so the community is experiencing the historical event in real time.
Yes.
But I do have a fundamental question about how they decided what was true enough to put on that screen.
Sure.
The sources mention the historian Bede, writing in the 8th century, and he developed this concept called the lex history, the true law of history.
Right, the lex history.
And he explicitly says this law relies on vulgar opinion or common belief. Does that mean the brightest minds of the Middle Ages literally thought public gossip was a valid historical record?
What's fascinating here is how they defined a historical fact. Today, we demand documentary evidence or, strict eyewitness accounts.
Yeah.
And to be fair, thinkers like Isidore of Seville demanded eyewitness accounts back then, too. But for writers like Bede, capturing how a community experienced an event was a profound truth in itself.
How so?
Well, if an entire village firmly believed that a local saint performed a miracle, the reality of their shared belief that vulgar opinion was a massive historical force. It shaped their identity, their resilience, and their future actions.
Okay, that actually makes total sense if you map it onto modern human behavior.
Right.
It sounds crazy to us to write down gossip as history, but is it really that different from how a viral narrative on social media essentially becomes historical truth for modern digital communities?
Exactly. Even if the physical facts are slightly different, the way the internet reacts to a story becomes the lived reality of that moment.
A perfect parallel. Capturing that communal reaction, that shared memory, was essential to the survival of the group.
And because the cantor controlled this communal memory, they possessed an incredibly potent tool. Liturgy could literally be weaponized to defend an institution against very real external threats.
Okay, so let's look at exactly how that weaponization worked.
Let's do it.
Take Eckhard IV, who was a polymath monk at the Abbey of St. Gallen, writing around the year 1050. He puts together a history of his abbey called the Casus Sancti Galli. But as he's writing this history, he weaves roughly 60 different references to liturgical song directly into the text.
Wait, if he's dedicating that much space to chant, he's not just writing a chronicle of events, is he?
No.
He's essentially writing a legal defense brief for his monastery, using sheet music as the evidence.
That is exactly what he's doing. During Eckhard's era, these powerful monastic reformers were traveling through Europe, attempting to take over independent abbeys by claiming the local monks weren't strictly adhering to the rule of St. Benedict.
Oh, I see.
So Eckhard used his abbey's unbroken musical traditions as an impenetrable shield. By meticulously documenting the chant, he was telling these outside reformers, look at our liturgy. We sing these specific melodies composed by our specific founders on these specific days.
Wow.
The liturgy was living, legal proof of their legitimate independent lineage. And popes use this exact same tactic on a massive geopolitical scale. Look at the Liber Pontificalis, the Book of Popes.
Yes.
It's a foundational medieval text. Now, you would assume a history of the papacy would be wall-to-wall wars, territorial disputes, and decrees, but it is painstakingly obsessed with liturgical innovations.
It really is.
It goes out of its way to note that Pope Telesphorus instituted the Lenten fast, or that Pope Sergius I added the Agnus Dei, the chant, calling on the Lamb of God to the Mass.
Because by embedding those details into the official history, the Liber Pontificalis cemented the popes as the absolute authorities over Christian time and space.
Right.
If you are the person orchestrating how the entire known world worships week to week, adding elements like the Agnus Dei to the universal routine, you control the fundamental rhythm of their lives.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Understanding how liturgy builds an invisible wall of authority is one thing. But what happens when that theoretical weapon faces an actual physical army?
Right, when theory meets reality.
Look at what happens with Pope Leo IV in the 9th century. Rome is under imminent threat from Saracen attacks. The Pope orders the construction of the massive Leonine walls to fortify the city.
Right.
But the physical mortar and stone weren't enough. The records describe Leo and his clergy walking the entire circuit of these newly built walls, barefoot.
Yeah.
They had ash smeared on their heads. They were weeping openly, sprinkling holy water, and singing a very specific mass called the Salus Populi.
Which translates to the salvation of the people. And we must emphasize that the singing of the Salus Populi wasn't just a nice accessory to the defense of the city.
It wasn't just for show.
No, in the minds of the Romans, the chant was the defense. The physical space, the ritual, and the politics were completely fused together. This grueling barefoot performance was an active weapon meant to secure divine protection.
And project absolute unbreakable solidarity to anyone within the city or anyone watching from outside.
Absolutely.
It is a stunning visual. But even Leo's barefoot march around the walls pales in comparison to the ultimate high-stakes performance we mentioned at the start of the show.
Oh, yes.
We've established the theory of communal memory and liturgical power. Now let's put it to a literal life or death test.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Pope Eugene I.
A truly fascinating figure who stepped into a geopolitical nightmare.
Yeah, to set the scene, it is the year 654. Eugene is elected pope. He's a seasoned Roman priest, But his election has a massive, glaring complication.
A huge one.
The previous pope, Martin I, is still alive.
Yeah.
He hasn't resigned. He's been forcibly removed from Rome by Emperor Constans II of the Byzantine Empire, who had Martin kidnapped and exiled to Cherson, which is a remote outpost in Crimea.
And the flashpoint for this kidnapping was a theological dispute over monothelitism, which is the doctrine that Jesus had only one will, rather than distinct human and divine wills.
Right.
Now, looking at this impartially as historians, the theology itself was secondary to the politics. This was just a brutal imperial loyalty test.
That makes sense.
The Byzantine emperor desperately needed religious unity to hold his fracturing, multi-ethnic empire together. He demanded the Pope sign off on this one-will doctrine. Pope Martin bluntly refused to comply, so the emperor had him physically removed.
It's the ultimate hostile corporate takeover we talked about earlier. Eugene steps into the leadership void while the beloved former leader is suffering in a penal colony.
Exactly.
Everyone in the Byzantine court, and likely many cynical observers in Rome, assumed Eugene was only elected to be a puppet. They figured he would just rubber stamp whatever religious decrees Emperor Constans put in front of him to avoid getting kidnapped himself.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Eugene's papacy becomes a masterclass in navigating impossible pressure.
Definitely.
He has the emperor breathing down his neck with an army. He has the haunting legacy of Martin looming over every decision. And he has the local Roman clergies and citizens who fiercely oppose Byzantine interference.
So he's trapped.
Completely. Eugene has to prove he is no puppet, but he has to do it without immediately getting himself killed.
Which brings us to the year 656. The defining moment of Eugene's papacy doesn't happen in a quiet, backroom diplomatic negotiation. It happens in public, inside the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome.
A very public stage.
Picture the interior of this space. It is cavernous, packed shoulder to shoulder with the Roman clergy, the nobility, and everyday citizens. The air is thick with incense and tension. Byzantine legates have arrived straight from the emperor, and they bring a synodical letter from Patriarch Peter of Constantinople.
Right.
This letter is to be read publicly to the congregation.
And this letter is a masterpiece of political doublespeak. The Patriarch deliberately uses convoluted, obscure language to avoid making any clear declaration on the wills of Christ.
It makes a trap.
Yes. The Byzantine strategy was insidious. They were trying to sneak the monothely heresy past the Romans without overtly stating it, hoping the exhausted Roman clergy would just nod along, accept the letter, and restore communion with Constantinople.
But the congregation sees right through the bureaucratic fog.
They do.
The letter is read aloud, and the reaction is explosive. The people of Rome don't just politely object or walk out in protest. The records show they physically blockade the doors of St. Mary Major.
Wow.
They trap Pope Eugene inside his own basilica. The claustrophobia and the danger in that moment must have been overwhelming. The crowd outright refuses to let the Pope leave the church until he explicitly, publicly promises to reject the emperor's letter.
It is a breathtaking moment of historical agency. Going back to Bede's concept of communal memory here, you have the community itself physically forcing a historical outcome.
Yeah.
The congregation's shared belief and their physical mass dictated the actions of the papacy. The ritual space of St. Mary Major became a literal battleground for independence. In that tense standoff, Eugene's authority was entirely dependent on his willingness to align with the communal will of his flock, defying the most powerful man in the world.
And Eugene makes his choice. He sides with the crowd, he promises to reject the letter, and he formally does so.
He does.
Emperor Constans is completely enraged. According to the histories, the emperor threatened to march on Rome and literally roast Eugene alive, treating him with even more cruelty than he showed to Martin.
Yeah, a horrific threat.
And given the emperor's track record, this was not an empty threat. So how did Eugene survive being roasted?
Pure, chaotic geopolitics intervened.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Constans II was facing massive external pressures that suddenly required his full attention. The Muslim conquests were expanding rapidly across the Mediterranean, and the emperor's forces suffered a devastating, catastrophic defeat at the naval Battle of the Masts, also known as the Battle of Phoenix, against the Arab fleet.
Wow, okay.
The Byzantine military was crippled. Constans simply became too distracted and too weak to follow through on his threat to march on Rome.
So because of that geopolitical stroke of luck, Eugene survives the crisis. He continues to govern the church and dies a natural death a year later in 657, eventually being canonized as a saint.
It's amazing.
It is an incredible cinematic story of survival. But the reality is, Eugene's brave stand, the claustrophobic showdown at St. Mary Major, the threat of being roasted, all of it, would be completely lost to the void of time, if not for the unglamorous daily grind of the people we started this deep dive talking about.
Right.
The monastic scribes.
Yes, the invisible hands of history, the people who spent thousands of hours compiling the Liber Pontificalis, and the generations of monks who spent their lives copying it, century after century.
Exactly. Let's fast forward a couple hundred years after Pope Eugene, back to the Abbey of St. Gallen in the 880s, to look at one of these invisible hands. His name is Notker Balbulus, often known as Notker the Stammerer. He holds the title of Bibliosicarius, the librarian.
And it's vital to demystify what that job actually looked like.
Yeah.
When we picture a medieval monk working on a book, we usually imagine someone painting grand, illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf and elaborate artwork.
Right, like a masterpiece.
Notker was not doing that. He was the project manager. He organized teams of younger scribes. He compiled the martyrologies, the daily lists of saints to be read aloud.
Okay.
And he spent hours hunched over a desk, analyzing other people's sloppy work and making corrections in red ink. One text specifically highlights Notker desperately trying to fix a completely chaotic numbering system in a manuscript of the Vita, or Life of St. Augustine, left behind by previous, careless copyists.
So, what does this all mean? Why does a brilliant mind in the 9th century dedicate his life to fixing chapter numbers in red ink?
Well,
Because if Notker doesn't figure out the correct numbering, the whole system of communal memory collapses.
exactly. It's a domino effect.
Yeah.
The monks read the Passions of the Saints on specific feast days. If a previous copyist messed up the dates or the chapter numbers, the cantor won't assign the story of a specific martyr on their actual feast day.
Oh, wow.
The reading gets skipped. The liturgical loop we talked about earlier isn't closed. The saint is forgotten by that generation. By sitting there with his red ink, cross-referencing and fixing the numbers, Notker ensures that when the day comes, the right story is pulled from the shelf.
He is literally maintaining the machinery of the time spiral.
Precisely. And Notker understood the stakes of this machinery perfectly. We have a letter he wrote to his pupil, Salomo. Notker explains that the reason you must read the Passions of the Saints is so that, by their example, you learn to spurn the delights of the world and to think nothing of the troubles of your body.
That's intense.
He was actively giving his fellow monks psychological armor. By reading about the martyrs, by reading about a pope like Eugene who stood up to an emperor threatening to roast him alive, the monks of St. Gallen were preparing themselves to face their own trials. The history Notker curated in red ink was the fuel for their spiritual endurance.
Yeah, it is just incredible to bring all these threads together for you. History is never just a passive record of things that happen. It is an active, ongoing performance. It's a defiant pope, trapped in a basilica by a congregation demanding he stand his ground. And it's a tired manager in a scriptorium centuries later, scratching away with a red pen to ensure that story survives another 1,000 years, so it can inspire the next person who needs the courage to face an empire.
This raises an important question for us living in the modern world. In our current age of infinite, overwhelming information, who are our cantors?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Who are the algorithms and the engineers organizing the liturgy of our daily news feeds, our timelines, and our digital archives? And more importantly, what specific narratives are they actively pulling from the past to shape our present behavior?
That is the crucial question to ask when you look at your feed today. Now, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought drawn right from the margins of the records we explored. The texts mention that the Liber Pontificalis, that book of popes containing Eugene's epic standoff, was heavily copied and adapted by the Franks in the 8th and 9th centuries. Now, the Franks were Germanic people, far removed from the city of Rome. Yet they obsessed over copying this Roman history to integrate themselves into the Roman legacy.
Right.
We've spent this entire deep dive talking about how recording history preserves the past. But consider this. How does the very act of meticulously recording someone else's history ultimately rewrite your own identity?
Oh, wow.
By spending their days copying the lives of Roman popes, those Frankish monks fundamentally transformed what it meant to be a Frank. So what happens to us when we spend our lives documenting, sharing, and consuming the stories of others? Does the history we choose to curate eventually become who we are?
That is something to think about.
Think about that the next time you find yourself scrolling through the endless archive of human events and realize you're actually stepping onto a stage. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.